And it is episode 364. I have 3 different numbers on my page, and apparently I'm not a very good note taker and note fixer, because I almost said it was 362, 363, now 364. But that's just a Randy problem. I will be open and honest that I am working through a migraine, and so I have the caffeine jitters at this point. So if I say something really stupid...
You know what always just impresses me so much, Randy?
Just go for it.
You are better than the mailman when it comes to podcasts. You deliver it. Rain, snow,
sleet, hail,
migraines. I don't know. You power through. It takes something pretty catastrophic. So
I almost texted you texted y'all at 3:30 this morning when I was puking my guts out. So, and said, I'm not sure I'm going to make it tomorrow, but we prevailed. I had cheese curds. I mean, what are you supposed to do with cheese curds for staff if they don't come and make it to staff, right?
So is that a cause of the migraine or a cure for the migraine?
Yeah, over the course of the weekend, we did cheese out pretty well, because that's where the cheese curds are fresh. That's where you have to really enjoy them. What you get here in Florida, places like Culver's, they're real, but they're not the real.
Yeah,
the
ones you brought were
Wisconsin
good.
real.
It's not going 3 blocks away to the cheese factory that they then carry them over and dunk them in this beautiful breading and then deep fry them so that you can enjoy them type fresh.
Man, I did not have a big lunch. I'm feeling hungry at the moment.
I know, me too. But yeah, we did all kinds of things while we were gone. Friday night, the Friday night fish fry. If you've never had a Wisconsin perch plate, you're missing out. And if you're in the Green Bay area for the 2025 NFL draft, which was just announced, sorry, you can go to Mackinaw's. They've got great perch plate, which I found out on Friday night.
All right,
So
podcast field trip. But
it was a field trip. And
It would not be a podcast if food wasn't mentioned.
I was just going to say, at some point we have to get food involved. So, I felt like the whole weekend was kind of a big deal. It was a big deal for my family, what we were doing. Just a short trip, but a really fun trip. I missed Ken's 2-year anniversary here at WholeLife Church.
No,
We haven't quite missed it.
It's actually
forecast
it's the second Sabbath in June.
Is it the
Is the first sermon that I preached at WholeLife. So
Okay, I said first Sabbath. It was the second
Well,
Sabbath.
I said that last year too. So we were just continuing a tradition of being completely confused about when my. I feel like I kind of started working in late April, early May. I just didn't preach until
That's true.
June.
So maybe that's where I got that from.
Yeah, whatever.
But that means then we're almost 100. We're over 100 episodes in.
Man,
with Ken behind the mic.
That's crazy.
That is crazy. It doesn't seem. I mean, sometimes it seems long, but not typically. I'm just like, wow, has it been?
I'll take it.
When John mentioned 2 years, I was like, wait a minute, 2020. Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
time flies when you're
we
having
bought
fun.
our house here in April 2 years ago, so we're officially Florida
right
residents for over 2 years. So.
That's
Wow.
it.
Yeah.
And then as already mentioned, or did I mention it? I don't know. Special guest speaker this week. So Ken could be gone.
I want to say a huge thank you to John for covering for me this this last Sabbath while I was up in North Carolina hanging out with my son. He was part of graduation ceremonies at the school he's at there. And so we went up to pick him up and bring him home. So he's home now. And so John, normally when I ask staff to cover for me, they get to kind of pick the topic that they want to cover, but you really went the extra mile. You took on a great question. I think that was very courageous. And by the way, I watched first service. I had to be at another church service later on that day, but I watched first service and I think you did a fabulous job. I thought the sermon was really good.
Well, I truly enjoyed it. And it didn't feel like that big of an ask to me. When I heard the topic, I just really, I purely enjoyed it. Maybe more than I should have. It was a lot of fun.
I can just tell you I'm enjoying it right now. I enjoyed it not until today because I was gone and I didn't have a chance for either scenes. I did check. I shouldn't say this, but I was gone, but I did. And I had someone backing me up here in Orlando. Thank you, Philip. But I did check at 9:13 to make sure that all of the spots went online, just so in case. And then again when it went at 11:43.
Good to me.
You can take Randy out of whole life, but you can't take the whole life out of Randy.
Oh,
There it
man.
is.
And so second service, we spent on a Harley Davidson and my girls and stuffed in a sidecar. So we were
Nice.
we were having fun. So I can't say that I thought about it at that point. But,
So, by the way,
oh,
this was kind of cool. I don't know. You can decide whether you want to use this or not. But I was in North Carolina at an event, and I had a guy walk up to me and said, "I love your podcast."
Come on.
True story.
Wow.
True story. And I actually
we
had
have-
him. I actually video recorded him
Did you say thanks,
saying
Dad?
it. It was that's fair. That's fair. But this was actually someone who is not related to me whatsoever, believe it or not. Yeah. So it was pretty cool. And so I actually said, "Hey, could you let me record you saying?" So I mean, I know that Randy loves hearing these things, and so he let me
Absolutely.
record him. And so let me see if I can pull this up. It's. Hey, Randy, I want to introduce you. I'm at Eric's school right now anyway, and I want to introduce you to somebody who listens to our podcast. True?
Yeah, absolutely.
How'd you hear about it?
So I was talking with Eric, and he told me that some of them might be on Spotify. So I went back and looked at them, and I've been listening through like 2 years worth almost now. So I've been really enjoying them. So thank you guys.
So I guess you're right. Our numbers are going up.
Wow,
Wow.
that's
Look
awesome.
at that. Pretty cool, huh?
Well, it is pretty cool because these are the times when you hear people that are like, "Oh, I'm almost 2 years, going back 2 years." Then that's when you see the numbers of odd episodes. Like, what are people listening to today? I can see that on our dashboard, and it's like episode 5. And I'm like, wow, someone is going through the catalog and just like working their way back. So we just hit our 5th month of, in a row of
By the way,
numbers
that
going
was
up.
Jeffrey. So Jeffrey, if you're listening to this episode, thank you.
Yeah, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
And if you ever have a question,
Send it in.
Send it in because we'd be happy to tackle it. And I was thinking when the previous week and John heard what the question was that he had, it was like a 3-parter. And when every single phrase like contains the word divine in it, and in questioning, do we have that divine power? Do our words contain that divine power? How do we get that power? And I'm like, man, I don't know how I would even. Where would I start with a question like this? And of course, after the message, I'm like, well, that was pure genius, John. That was. I'm with Haas. I was of that generation. Maybe a lot of us are. That it was sticks and stones may break my bones, and of course, we've always known that was not true. That it really can, but the way you came after it, and just from salt of the earth, common sense. Just everything that I feel like John Monday is on a typical day here at WholeLife Church. And I really appreciated how you used a couple of different stories, and even some of your own, the Joel Hunter, the cafeteria line story. That's like the first thing that came to my mind was, man, I hope this guy is the short line like the cafeteria Nazi, like from Seinfeld. This guy's like, no food for you. But no, he's the affirmation guy. And how many people don't want to hear that, even from somebody that they don't know? And it's, at least I've thought in that situation, maybe could be creepy, but I guess the cafeteria guy, I mean, right?
Well, apparently it wasn't creepy to the kids going through the line.
No, obviously the numbers pointed that out. And I'd never heard you tell the story before, and maybe you have, with Andy McDonald and the head elder that came to you and just said, we know who you are. We'd like you to come work. And I immediately resonated with that story because when I first met Ken, we went to lunch. And he's like, someday we need to work together. He's like, we had fun at lunch and I like to work with people. And I was like, okay. File that away for, whatever. And then as it comes to fruition and you find yourself here and you think back to how you got here. And when people ask me, well, how did you end up working at a church? Especially people like you, Pookie, I hope you're listening this week. There's something about the idea that somebody else sees value in you that isn't related And at that point, Ken didn't know me very well. We had just met for maybe we'd known each other a couple of weeks, but how did it make you feel? Not only did you say yes, obviously, to come to work here, but did it change the way you viewed the job because of the way you came here?
Well, to start with, I don't think that my experience is probably all that unique of people that work here. This is just like you were saying. I think, and as I'm thinking about it, most of the people that work here, I think, were recruited relationally because of who they were. And it's sort of one of those times of very much trying to get the right people on the bus. And
that's a little Dave Ramsey right there.
It feels really good when smart, accomplished people tell you that you're the right person to be on the bus.
Did you hear what John just said about you, Ken?
And I heard it.
Yeah.
And so, and then it makes you want to be the person they think you are. It changed my life. Obviously, I've worked here for 18 years. Think about what that means to have just few words influence what you're going to do for the next 18 20 years.
Yeah.
It's huge. And I thought back, there were so many times in my life when somebody has said just a few words that changed everything.
Yeah, I think we all have those. Even beside of one like I just mentioned, I can think of a couple that come to mind. And what I liked about your message was sometimes we feel like we're taking things in and we're listening and we're trying to wrap our minds around what's being talked about and making sure we're not missing points. And then when you had told everyone to make sure they brought their phone, and I really was wondering, like, no one asked for a mentee, so I'm like, okay, we're not doing a survey, and I'm like, he's not gonna like let people use their phone in the middle of church. What would they use it for? But I thought it was genius to invite people to do it, but also do it together. There's a little bit of vulnerability when you're sitting next to someone and you put some of those on the screen, like, I'm sorry, and don't put the button there, because if you put the button there, it means that you're doing it wrong. But to engage somebody that you hadn't talked to for a while and really showing in action the power of our words, to do that in that setting, I thought it was genius. And I couldn't hear over because the microphones aren't going to pick up all of that unless it was a really loud ringer. But did you see a lot of people raise their hands? We didn't get a shot of it on, at least in second, is what I believe the service I watched. I didn't see if people were holding their phones up, but did a lot of people hold them up? Did they get responses?
There were a pretty fair number. Yes, there were a lot of people holding up their phones. I wish everybody would have held up their phones, but there were a lot of people. So people were engaged, and I have to tell you, there were some power words that I chose not to use. I thought it would just be a little too negative. I was going to do things like tell people, if you're not holding up your phone, I dare you to hold up your phone, or calling them chicken if they didn't hold up their phone.
Oh, that has a lot of power. That one right there.
Wow.
But I decided, those are powerful, but maybe in the wrong direction. Not going to do that.
But I kept hearing intermittent dings, or sounds indicating that people were getting messages. And I saw at least one person who got a phone call and stepped out. Like, you gave them permission to do that.
Yeah.
Maybe they were ordering Chipotle or something. I don't know.
Well, you never know.
But, if you have to apologize to the Chipotle guy for the way you treated him when he showed up, that's okay. So,
but I would love to hear the stories. I mean, if anybody's listening and you sent a text, or you got a text, or you got a call, or if something happened since then. And of course, I know for me, maybe it's the generation I'm in. Usually if I send somebody a text, I'm not getting something back right away. It's going to be a couple hours to a couple of days, generally speaking. But
see, this is why I love John Monday. Because John Monday knows how to set it up. He just threw that softball right across the plate for my next point, was if you participated and if you got a response, and I'm going to ask you to do it a little bit differently than we normally do, but I would love if you would read it in a voicemail, because I would love to just put a bonus together episode. And even if that was next Sunday or Monday before we release it, if I could get as many as I can, I'll hold off. But if you actually did it, I would love to hear it in your words instead of just reading it as a text message, because that's a little less impersonal. Just given the fact of what John asked y'all to do, I think if you were even if you read the text or the exchange, or if there's a part of it that you don't want to read the actual words because it's too personal, then just, let us know how it went. And as much as you can, it would just be great to hear those stories. So you could do that voicemail at 407-965-1607. And then I will put all those together and I will put them into a bonus episode, because I really think that would show really the power of, the questions that John was really struggling with. In Genesis 1, you started talking about, then God said, and this is what happened, and the repetition of that over and over. And you said, what if a portion of the like us, meaning like us to God and to the Trinity, is to speak and use words to engage others for him, and the power of those words. And I had never thought about that specifically in that way before. And it was an aha moment. And you sealed it with the Tower of Babel when they're like, how do we stop these people? It confused their language. There goes the power. And it really, to me, that really was a powerful thought process of, whoa, if you can stop that language from everyone understanding each other, you render them pretty harmless. That was a great illustration.
Well, I never really thought about the Genesis story in that way either. But it really hit me when reading the Genesis story and then reading the first verses in the book of John, and how they were both went back that way. But the scripture that we were talking about was, the power of words. And it made me begin to think, are our words powerful regardless of what we do? And that was where the Tower of Babel story came in. It's like, no, the words were powerful, whether they were used for good or were used for evil. The words were moving mountains. Yeah. So something had to be done.
Another question that brought up for me was, what about free will then? We talk about God in our ability to have free will when we deal with God. And it's like, well, if he doesn't intervene, he's like, nothing will be impossible for them. So is that free will because of that?
Wow, that sounds like a great sermon for John to preach next time.
Question.
And so I know that's off topic, but that was the first thought when you said it, was once the impact of it came, and like you said, whether we use them for good or whether we use them for evil. But then, well, wait a minute. My first thought was, well, what would have happened if nothing was impossible for them? What trajectory in the space-time continuum does the Earth go if God just doesn't do anything and allows it to go that way? And that's what made me think, well, was it a reduction in free will just for your own good? Was it not at all? I don't know. That's a tough one for me.
Ken and Melanie, you're looking at me. You all do this all the time.
John is desperately looking around. We're like, hey, you preached this week. You answered that question. If Randy wants to throw a 100-mile-per-hour ball across,
you got softballs on stage this week, so we saved the best.
Yeah, y'all really suckered me in, and then you get that. So let's just go free will from here. No. I don't think I have an answer for your question.
That's a good answer.
Yeah, no, that's acceptable, because I don't know if there is one. I mean, I don't always understand, and I don't always think that when I read stories in the Bible, whether they're true or they're allegories meant to teach us something, I don't always feel like we really do have the free will that we think we do. So this is something that I think about anyway. And then this was just like,
I think free will is a great idea, but I think we have so much more power than we think we have. And the Tower of Babel is not the only time when God ruminates about nothing will be impossible for him if we don't slow him down. He does the same thing in the Genesis story and the creation story, and it's indicated in many other places. So, I mean, I think another takeaway from that is to think about how much power do we really have that we don't realize we have. That's there all the time, and we throw it around as if it doesn't matter.
Yeah, because if you're not aware of it, you can certainly abuse it easy. So,
John, your sermon, created a lot of conversation around our lunch table.
I was hoping to hear about
yeah.
that.
Yeah, it was really so I have a point of clarification question for you, because we were debating
free
this.
will?
She's trying to help him out, Randy.
This is a detour.
Well, I hope
This is a quick turn. Well, I don't. Yeah. Well, we'll just wait and see. Okay, here's the question. So when you were talking about the power of words that people have to speak, is that divine power that people are speaking, or human power that people are speaking when they speak things into existence or create with their words?
Well, I'll start at the end, which is I'm not 100% sure what I mean, but I'll also say I had a little bit of this conversation with you, Melanie, last week beforehand, and I had to change a little bit, because one of the things I proposed to you was that what if words themselves are divine? And Melanie challenged me, saying, "So you're a pantheist now?" And I said, "Well, no, I'm pretty sure I'm not that. So let's go another route."
I don't like that label. So how can I change this?
So I think that God gives, through God's divine power, he gives us power. And then does that mean that that power that he gives us, is that divine or is it human? Can it be both? Can it be divine in its origin and human in its application, or human in its misuse? I think there are things that he gives us, again, and I think it's part of the like us. It's the in God's image. So when we start talking about the things that characterize us, that are a part of God's image, then the divine human line gets a little bit fuzzy, which is not to say that we are divine. I don't believe that in any way, but I do believe that God divinely granted us abilities that he does not grant to any other part of creation.
Think about some of the people that you know that are super intelligent. They talk like their vocabulary, their delivery is very, just always perfect. And you think to yourself, I can see divinity in that. Like, your gift from God was communication or words or the putting together of words. My dad and I had a conversation about school and what we were good at while I was home this weekend. And he's like, reading. He's like, I've read more books in the last 10 years or 20 years than I read in my entire schooling. He's like, because that spelling, reading, pronunciation, the English language was never something that I was good at. Whereas for myself, I mean, from an early age, I couldn't always explain it. I didn't always do well on tests because I can't prove it. It was just something that I was good at, and it came naturally to me. And so I think sometimes when we try to decipher one versus the other, if that was your gift from God, how you choose to use it, whether you choose to speak truth or you speak good in general about everything, I mean, I guess that's open to interpretation. What line would be called, divine, or what might be called human. But I think there's a lot of proof just looking around that a lot of people who are really good orators and who are really good at crafting and making you just hang on their words, it's not always about positive things, or it's not always about things that would be uplifting or things that I think would be pleasing to God. So I think it's really hard to differentiate what your gift from God and being in his likeness might be, but whether or not that's words of divinity or divine power.
Yeah, I was trying to think of an analogy because we were positing different ideas of what we thought you might be saying. And I was thinking about the idea of, for example, my son was sitting at the table and we were talking, and he's very musical. He plays the guitar, and I like to think he got his musical inclination from me, even though he's a better musician than I'll ever be. But he got that from me, but yet what he does with it is his. So it doesn't necessarily belong to me, even though it came from me. Is that kind of what you were?
No, I love that. Yes, that's exactly what I meant, Melanie.
Okay.
Good recovery, John. That was quick.
You are so insightful. You got that. No, I do think that's a big part of it. God gives us gifts, And even though they're beautiful, wonderful, even perfect gifts, that doesn't mean that we perfectly use them. And when I think about the power of words, and you used a great example of musical ability and your musical ability and what your son has, I've seen, and I know all of us in this room who have worked in church work and pastoral work have seen this. I have seen parents use words to their kids that have absolutely put them in boxes and surrounded them with trenches and mountains that kid can't see, and I can look and see they're not there, but that kid cannot escape them. No. They are as real as they can be. And I've likewise seen parents use these words of power that have helped their children understand that they could do things far beyond what anybody thought they could do. So, I just think God has given us this gift, and it's going to have an impact. I think it's going to have a supernatural impact. It's going to have an impact beyond simply the value of moving air around.
I think part of it for me was just the realization or the remembering, the bringing it back to your attention, putting it in the forefront, because it's often we communicate about a lot of different things, and some of them more important than others. Sometimes it's not always about God, even though God is what's pushing us in our lives, hopefully, if that's what we're searching for and that's who we're trying to emulate. But just finding or remembering that how powerful those words. And when you said magic tricks, kind of relying on our own words and our own will versus miracles, which, submitting our will and our words to God, that puts a responsibility on us that I didn't feel like it's a heavy responsibility. Like it, oh man, that's one more thing I gotta worry about. But more so, what a good responsibility, what an honor it is that God would give us this gift for us to use and to take it more as a challenge or more as how could I really get good at this? How could I really make sure that when I talk to John or I talk to Melanie or anyone, that my goal is to raise up, not cut down. Even if I don't know for sure what's going on in their lives, there's easy ways to just raise people up a little bit. And I think the more we do that, the better we get. And hopefully the more we start to realize what a real gift that is. That responsibility is probably not the right word that I'm looking for, but maybe it's more of an honor, or that God would give that to someone like me who, when you know all of your shortcomings, it feels like a pretty big deal.
Well, again, I think one of the things I started doing a few years ago, and there's a lot of things I don't do right, and there's not many things I do completely right, probably not any. But I realized a few years ago that from time to time, here's a great insight. From time to time, I think about people. How's that?
Good job, John.
But I decided, you know what? I've been thinking about this person for 5 minutes, and I have the technology in hand to reach out to him. So why not just reach out to him? And just if I said nothing more than I'm thinking about you, I've realized that if somebody I haven't seen in 5 years sends me a text and says I'm thinking about you,
that's pretty cool.
It changes my day.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take much effort for me to use these things that I believe are divine in origin to change somebody else's day.
Yeah.
And that's what I said when I wasn't able to answer the question you were asking. So we'll go with that.
Well, talking about responsibility, honor, in terms of what we say, I think it's First Peter. It says something to the effect of, if any of you speaks, you should speak as though you're speaking the very words of God.
Wow.
And I think about that. I have thought about that a lot over the past years. And I remember when our son was killed, I had the opportunity to speak to the kid who killed him in the court. And as I was sort of thinking what I want to say to him, I was praying about it, and I was just really strongly impressed that I could not say anything to him that could potentially damage his heart in such a way that he couldn't come to repentance, that would damage him away from God. So that responsibility that I had on my words as I walked into the courtroom and I faced him was a mandate in terms of what God was allowing me to say to this kid. And I mean, speaking of power, that was a momentous moment, I guess, where I realized the power of my words and what those words could do in that moment.
Yeah, and what an incredibly powerful moment. And what you chose to do was not, I would dare say, what was the easy thing to do. And I would also say that probably the words, and I'm just now thinking about this as I hear your story, amazing story. It wasn't only how the words would impact him, but it's how the words that you would speak would impact you.
Right. Yeah, would impact me. And you know what? Our family was all sitting there. His family was all sitting there. The judge was sitting there. The victim's rights advocate was all sitting there. And I realized afterward, when people talked to me about what I said, that it wasn't just me and this kid in the room. It was everybody who heard, and like you were saying, it was affected by what happened.
Yeah, there's always an audience, or
Yeah.
almost always an audience.
Yeah.
It's very scary to think about. Jeff and I, he's meeting with some people family that lost a loved one. And I'm like, man, I'm glad that's your job and not my job, because I'm always nervous, and I can't even imagine being in that courtroom under those circumstances, but always afraid to say the wrong thing when your intentions are so good. Even like you pray about it, and I don't know if anyone else has, but in sticky situations or uncomfortable, or just where the situation calls for so much tact, and you pray about it, and it's just like something comes out of your mouth that you just are so surprised, and you're like, why? How could this in any way be a plus to the situation that we just encountered? And you just it's not what you want, and you're just like, So the power and the responsibility, that brings it to a whole nother level. But what an honor to speak for God and his ideals and what he wants for each of us, to someone who, I can't even imagine what he went through too, after knowing, once you realize what your actions, the power of your actions in the same way.
Yeah.
Well, we had a couple of questions, and the first one was from some guy. I think he used a pseudonym online. He said
You should definitely skip that one.
He said his name was Ken.
He actually answered it during Q&A.
Did he? Did you? Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't. So it must
It
have been
was
at
the
first.
softball one. I wasn't trying it for a softball, but apparently,
I gotcha.
Haas thought it was. So
Okay.
Well, which one was it?
That was so do you think Jesus saying we could move mountains was metaphorical and not literal?
I don't remember what I said. What did I say? It was really, really smart at the time.
It was
you
good.
said that you said that you thought that it could be literal, but it was most likely meant to be metaphorical.
Yeah, and it's coming back to me a little bit, but the scripture that was surrounding this, when Jesus said, "If you had the faith of a mustard seed, you could move mountains."
Yeah.
What the disciples had been asking was not to move mountains; it was about casting out demons, and so, and that's what really started me thinking a lot about the demons that we cast out, and the demons that we cast in very frequently, and I don't know for sure all the time what Jesus meant when he said demons, or what other New Testament speakers thought about when they said demons. But I know, and we talked about it a little bit before, especially with the power of parents. I've watched people put demons into people's lives, and I've had people cast demons out of mine when they put an arm around me and said it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
There have been at least 3 times in my life when those were the exact words, and those were the only words, and it changed everything.
Changed it, yeah. All right. Mom Doc asked, how can our emotions, our faith, and our distress affect our words? Should we pretend everything is okay always? Should we be drastically frank? Or is it possible to always have full control of our words? I'm not going to speak for anybody else here, but the answer to that, at least the last part, is no. To always have control of our words, that's something that I've been working on for a long time, and I wish I was better at. So I don't know about that, but should we always pretend everything is okay? No, I don't like. I
don't think that's what
that.
we're called to do.
No, I don't like that.
I don't think that's the way it is. I don't think that's what we're called to do. I think this one was actually answered during the service as well.
Was it? That might have been first
service. Yeah.
Okay.
I wonder if because there are two things kind of intertwined in there. One is emotion and one is words. And it seems to me that the words would be a response to the emotion. And I think what I have heard some people say in the past is you're not responsible for the emotion that occurs, but you are responsible for what you do with it. And so I wonder if that responsibility then would fall on the words that are spoken as a result of that emotion. Can you create a space there between your emotion and your words?
And those are so intertwined that sometimes I wonder if the emotions are speaking into the words things that the words don't really necessarily mean. Like you could put it in there. Well, I think if someone could have said that without being so emotional, I think I would have taken it differently. But the fact that this person got either upset or they had tears or they were clearly, shaken to have to say these words, and then you go, well, there must be more to it that I don't get, and so I think sometimes the combination of those two, and that's difficult. That's so to me that's so situational and so personal about how you deal with certain things. Like if you get angry to the point of crying, and someone might say, well, they're crying because they know they're wrong or they're weak or this, and it's like, no, I'm just, I'm so angry that I just can't control, that part of my emotions. So I think that's difficult to really put a thumb on it, just like the divinity question.
Yeah, I think we need to give ourselves a little bit of slack in the sense of thinking we're not ever going to do it right all the time. And I also don't think that means we should give ourselves permission to fly off the handle. I know and man, I can be the king of rationalization. I have done this before. I have really gotten angry and verbally lost it on somebody while justifying to myself they needed somebody to lose it on them.
I love you, John Monday.
Yeah. And it took me a long time, I think, for God to say, no, not so much. That's really probably not the way. And I think about Melanie's story and how fantastic it, speaking to that young man in the courtroom. And I can't imagine not letting my emotions run away with me in that. But you certainly had emotions, and you had strong emotions, but you decided how you were going to use them. And you probably had to take a little time.
You know what? I dragged that mess into the presence of God, and I laid it out in front of God. And then what I took from the presence was what I could say. So I was able to have the processing time to work through it. It wasn't like an in-the-moment response, and I'm thankful for that.
I'm glad you just clarified that, because that answered a follow-up that Mom Doc had that said, how can we say loving words when something very difficult has to be said to someone you love? But in this case, even to someone who just, you had that opportunity and you drug the mess before God, and then, I think that's the only way to do it if you're not going to have, or if you're going to have any chance. I mean, John said he only had to fly off the handle at somebody. So that says once. So I would have to say people.
Mistake.
Yeah, just one.
I'd have to say people, and so I think that's really, really good. And this one I know was posited at the end of second, but but it's one I think that in case you missed the message, and I would encourage you to see it because it was a great message. Are we responsible for other people's feelings if our words do have the power to make people feel a certain way? Are you going into it with the idea that you're going to make someone feel a certain way? I think if that's the goal, then you're going to have to choose words wisely. And if the idea then is, I want them to feel a good way, a way to feel godly way, then we're going to have to do that as well, right?
When I hear that question, for me, it's kind of a two-parter in a way.
Okay.
You aren't responsible for how I feel. In other words, I have to take responsibility over my own feelings and own my feelings. With that said, I am responsible for how you feel. So, in other words, a lot of times there's that cop out that says, well, I can't help it if that offends you. Well, yeah, you can. And there are some times where there are hard things that have to be said that do, and it is what it is. You have to say it, but we all have the control over how we say things, the timing of how we say things, the tone with which we say those things. And so I think it's a little bit of, Cain, am I my brother's keeper kind of thing going on there.
Yeah.
And we murder somebody and then go, well, I mean, God, what are you talking about? And at the same time, I think that I have to understand that Melanie may say some things that make me feel bad. And I have to.
I'm sorry, Ken.
Yeah, well, I used you on purpose. I'm glad you caught on. But somebody can say some things that hurt me, that make me feel bad, and my responsibility is to own my own emotions and feelings and deal with it. It may be the appropriate thing to say, "Wow, that was kind of harsh." Wow, that felt pretty mean. And those are ways that we can legitimately talk back to people who are not being kind. But at the end of the day, they're one of the things I've tried to train my children is that they're just some mean people out there, and they're never going to say they're sorry. They're not going to talk to you differently. They may wind up being your boss. And if they are, you're going to have to decide whether you want to work in that environment or not. And sometimes you don't, if you're trying to pay the bills and you don't have other options, you're going to have to figure out how to deal with it. And that doesn't make it right. It doesn't mean that person's in the good, but you have to figure out how to sort through your own feelings to deal with that situation. But we all, I think, personally do, as Christians, have very much of a responsibility to think about the way that our words are impacting other people, and that we are responsible in that sense to care and to be careful with our words. I love what the Bible says about Jesus in the book of Isaiah. It says that he didn't break the weakest reed, meaning that, the person who had the most pain in their life, had the most damage to their life, Jesus didn't come in and break them. He came in and healed.
Yeah.
And that was what he worked towards.
I love that. And that's exactly the way I would have gone, which is to say, in each situation, I think we have the responsibility to take the position of responsibility. And there was an entire Andy Griffith episode about this one time. Maybe I can sum it up right here.
Yeah,
he said, if I lend you my car, I should expect the gas tank to come back empty, and I shouldn't be upset by that. But if I borrow your car, the gas tank's going to come back full, and I shouldn't be okay with anything else happening.
I think it's helpful just psychologically to be able to place the locus of control inside yourself in terms of what am I going to do with this, versus the chaotic feeling of having the locus of control in someone else's court. If someone can, says something to you or does something to you or whatever, even if that's wrong, if you can feel like, you know what, I have the choice of how to respond to this. I have the choice of how to process this and work through it, and the decision that I have to make in terms of what kind of response I might give. But that locus of control is inside you. And it's less of kind of being jerked around by other people.
Yeah, no, I like that. All right, as we wrap it up, I want to give the invitation again. If you sent a text, got a response, or you got a phone call, please do send a voicemail to 407-965-1607. That'll be the easiest way. If you want to text or email, go ahead. I'll read it. but I would really love to hear it in your own words, if possible. And we'll do a special episode if we get even one. We'll make it quick and we'll read one, because I think it's worth our time to hear each other's stories and to hear those outreaches and what the responses were. So,
and I'd love to hear it. I know I had people share with me in between the services, people who had made contact with somebody they hadn't heard from in 3 years. And
if you're one of those people,
after the service, there were other people that shared. I was very grateful for the 3 stories that I got. I hope there are more out there.
And if you already shared yours with John, share them with everybody else if you can. You can remain anonymous. If it comes in as a voicemail, I will have no idea who it is. You don't have to give your name, and I'm happy to read it, or in your own words, or read it, whichever the case may be. So do send those in as soon as you can, and we'll pick a cutoff time randomly, and we'll just get it out there at least before next Wednesday when we tape the podcast. And if you if you haven't watched the message, please do. It's worth every minute of your time. And I just wanted to read it was John 1:1-5, I believe, that John referenced. And it said, "In the beginning, the Word already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it." To me, there was a lot of things that I don't necessarily understand about how all that works in a way that the mystery of God is alive and well there. But it was also something that I found comfort in, that God let us know that. And then what all the importance might be something that every so often it might be good for us to go and think of those. And John finished with, "Our words can't help but move mountains, so let's be very careful how we use these mountain movers." And I think that's there was a good takeaway to end with. That was it. And so, John, of course, thank you again. I really, really enjoyed the message and today's conversation. And John was a little bit worried about you, Ken, when number 4 came across the screen. How you feeling? Feeling good? You started, or is it?
Pray for me.
It's not Friday yet. That's what I heard from John last.
Friday
He
yet.
said, "Well, it's not Friday yet. I mean, I'm not working on this yet."
I tell you what, this is a crazy week, so I am trying to figure out where all the research that I need to put in for this is going to come from. But it's going to be a good one. It's an interesting question.
Why did Jesus have to die?
Yeah.
Couldn't God just have forgiven us? I mean, that seems pretty cut and dried. I mean,
if God can do anything, right?
Right. I mean, if we're moving mountains with words, I mean, shouldn't the guy that gave us the person, the entity? I hate to say sorry. That was very 1980s of me.
Be careful with the power of your words, Randy.
Thank you. Right? Could you please just be careful with what you say?
It's going to be a fun sermon.
So don't miss next week.
I don't know that it'll have all the creativity that John's had, but it'll be a fun one.
He took a lot of good ideas. And what do you?
Well, when you get to use them all just once a year, you can really bring a lot.
You can save them up. I see how you're working there. All right. Well, again, please do send in any interactions that you had, and if you need to remain anonymous, we will figure out how to do that. And just let me know. 407-965-1607 or podcast at WholeLife.Church. Thanks for listening. And what was his name?
Jeffrey,
thank you for listening. And hey, Jeffrey, if you wouldn't mind, like Eric told you, maybe just tell a friend if you haven't already.
I think he has.
Has he?
I think he has.
Good job.
He's that kind of a guy.
I can kind of feel it now. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's going to do it for this week, guys. Thank you for listening and have a great week.